Yun, violin, and Sam Chung, cello. If you're just joining us, particularly those of you who will be at home or online, you are part of the final and concluding panel of the Schiller Institute Conference, A Beautiful Vision for Humanity in Times of Great Turbulence. This is panel 6, The Power of Reason to Change the Universe. It is said that the scientist and philosopher Gottfried Leibniz once said that music is the pleasure that the soul experiences in counting without realizing that it is counting. What we're going to do now is to show a brief excerpt from a 1988, it was actually made in 1987, but it was for the 1988 presidential campaign of Lyndon LaRouche, and it is called The Woman on Mars. We're showing this in order to pose a certain question, which I think will make a lot more sense after you see it. That was made in 1987. It was a 40-year program for a moon Mars colonization. And in the somewhat faded character of the graphic and animation that you just saw, there is a metaphor for the faded commitment of the United States to its future. That program was not unambitious or unrealistic at the time, but clearly it's 2 years away. Kind of like fusion power, always not here. But I say this for the purpose of just posing something particularly concerning the very beginning of what you saw, and of course, partially because of the faded character, you may not have noticed that there were 5 tones that were repeated. These are then in the 1980s attempts to play the intervals that Johannes Kepler had described in his Harmony of the Worlds. And they represent the ratio of the comparative angular velocities of the orbits of the planets at their farthest and closest distances to the sun, the aphelion and perihelion. And these were described by Kepler as musical intervals. So these represent the orbits of the planets, 5 planets. But there's a very particular issue that those tones were intended to at least pose, a question that they were intended to pose. The inner planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, are dense, metallic, with few or no moons. But Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, these are gaseous giants with many moons and rings. For example, the planet Saturn is now known to have 274 confirmed moons. What happened in between? There's an area called the asteroid belt. And the idea that there is, if you will, a form of shift between one group of planets and another group of planets clearly cannot be denied. Kepler, in his discussion of the universe or the solar system, in one sense discovered it. Not in the sense that the planets weren't there, but in the sense that by applying ideas like the idea of musical intervals, which was only one of 2 ideas that he applied, he tried to indicate by using the boundaries of sense perception something of a higher order and lifted mankind and himself away from his starvation during this period of the 30 Years' War into immortality. And there's a suggestion here in our title, The Power of Reason to Change the Universe, that this is an inherent capability and an important capability for the scientific mind. I'll just, one other thing that occurs to me that I just would like to say something about. Back in 1953, when the astronomer, and I may not say his name precisely right, Gerard de Vaucouleurs, noticed that the Milky Way galaxy was part of a larger system of galaxies. Now, the Milky Way had thought to be the extent by many of the whole universe until Edwin Hubble had demonstrated in 1923 that the Andromeda Spiral Nebula was not part of the Milky Way, but was actually a separate galaxy of its own. And the system of bright galaxies that was observed by Vaucouleurs seemed to fall along a great circle in the sky. He realized that these galaxies were distributed in a kind of flattened disk. Their strongest concentration was in the direction of the constellation Virgo. And through a system of supergalactic coordinates for latitude and longitude, which he established, Vaucouleurs was able to establish that we were somewhere near the edge of this supercluster of galaxies. We saw its center as the Virgo cluster, about 55 million light years distant. Now, this did violate the assumptions of homogeneity that were held at the time about the universe, but now determinations of supergalactic latitude and longitude are a tool of astrogation, of the navigation of the stars, for locating objects in what we now call the local supercluster. You've heard it said earlier today, talk of 2 trillion galaxies. And the thing that we just want to point out is that however large you conceive of the universe, as St. Augustine pointed out in his The Immortality of the Soul, the fact that you can contain such an idea in your mind means that the mind is larger than the thing that it contains. Augustine argued on the basis of that the mind was immortal and it could not be killed. What we're here to talk about and we have some very important and distinguished people to talk about this, is the power of reason to change the universe. And our first speaker is Jacques Cheminade, former French presidential candidate and president of Solidarité et Progrès.
Good evening or good night. I am very happy to have crossed the Atlantic to be with you tonight and sharing also the event with those who are on their screens. In Europe, it's in the middle of the night. Our fight, the challenge to the human mind, change the universe, increase the potential productive powers of labor. We are here to meet the challenge, and we know it. We know that to respond is a matter of life or death. For all of us and for the future generations. So let's then try to exemplify what Helga told us about Lynn. And I would have liked to find a better word than exemplify. And let's be inspired. By what the youth panel has provided to us before. Last Saturday, I was deeply moved in Paris by Robert Schumann's oratorio, Paradise and the Peri, performed at the Seine Musical Auditorium, located at the Île Seguin in Paris. It is one, if not the most, inspiring words of Schumann. It's about the atonement of a fallen angel. The paradox is that the auditorium was built at the place where the fortress of French industry, the Renault plant, had been built and shut down with the argument that it was technologically outdated. What does that apparent contradiction, territorial opposition between art and industry mean? Is it something fatal? What does it mean at our present historical moment, where the entire wave of human history moves towards a new, more human paradigm, while at the same time, bestiality is at rampage? The continuing conditions for this good wave to succeed in producing the scientific energy for the common future of humanity lies in all of us. As this conference has thrown the challenge. To take on that challenge demands to look from above at this Peri-Renault apparent contradiction. This apparent paradox. In the same way that we have to intervene from top down to build an architecture of shared security and development of a new type based on the Leibniz-LaRouche commitment to increase the potential productive powers of labor and related forms of technology, science, art, and history as a togetherness, as a one, beyond occasional apparent contradictions. I will start with LaRouche's discovery that solves the above-mentioned paradox of what is usually called an industrial revolution, as if it was something in itself. It is much more than that. Is it a shift in the way of thinking in all domains of creative activity. Let's listen to the wise words of Lyndon LaRouche. Once we grasped the idea that man is distinguished above all other living creatures solely by our willful capacity for effecting voluntarily axiomatic revolutionary improvements and increases in mankind's command over nature, that voluntary creative activity is a phenomenon in which all rational employment of the term knowledge is referenced. It is not the observed relations among sense phenomena which is a subject of knowledge. The proximate subject of knowledge is the changes in sensory phenomena patterns of behavior which have been affected cumulatively, historically, through the creative faculty of hypothesis generation. It is a relationship of such changes to increase in potential population density and to man's breaking through barriers of technology to make richly habitable the deserts, transform the deserts, or barren planets beyond our own, which tests historically to present date those deducible principles of higher hypotheses, which are thus shown to be the most reliable known choices of guides to truth respecting man's relationship to nature. Industry, in that process, is a continuous injection of new physical principles produced by successive validated higher hypotheses under the form of technological advances. Scientific discoveries lead, through subsumed technologies, towards consequent increases in the productive powers of labor. A society based on that is a more highly organized in principle, an agentropic or anti-entropic society. By contrast, a non-evolutionary model of physical economy is axiomatically entropic and corresponds to a model of national global economy which cannot be durable. It means decay and a related culture of death. Our Western societies submitted to a cult of money, Bitcoin, stable coins, and quicksand coins, decoupled from the reality of production, have become the thing of feudal predators invested now in military expenses, doped by the digital economy into a new form of a geopolitical Lebensraum, the revolutionary in reverse, carried by that culture of death. Two main points characterize here the Industrial Revolution needed to solve the apparent paradox. The first is a non-scalar development of types of energy mobilized in sustain the global process. It means an improvement per capita, per unity of surface, per unity of matter. It is the energy flux density defined and discovered by LaRouche that defines the superior actualized potential of nuclear energy and of fusion over fission as a self-sustaining process. The second is a set of all those machine tools and connected principles of design which derive implicitly from a specific axiomatically unique quality of scientific discovery, technology. It is a progress brought about from both the type of energy tapped and the machine tool design based on the least time and least action principle of Fermat, as a mastered process of change improvements. Leibniz, through the association with Colbert's Academy of Sciences, had first identified the juxtaposed effects of these two key points, stressing the increase of the productive powers of labor through the employment of the heat power machine. As Heraclitus and then Plato put it, there is nothing permanent but change. The creators at France's École Polytechnique said, its Polytechnique means a set of developing techniques. And at the Arts et Métiers, which is a sort of industrial arts center of the times, with education and exhibition of machines. Those people knew it. Workers, they said, should not be trained to accomplish physical acts or pushing buttons, but to acquire judgment on industrial processes and propose improvement in ideas boxes. Such changes, the becoming, are bounded by a unity, the good in Plato's terms. What in their own way employees or workers may characterize as a good job, not a bullshit job, not to take interest in a task to means one living, but to accomplish something useful for her or his society defined by a certain idea of the good job done, performed. A key point that LaRouche makes is that to effect the Industrial Revolution, you need a pedagogical approach in the internal history of science. Not only science at the moment, but the history of science. So, Lin said. So, the continued successful existence of mankind relies upon the mental processes which generate and replicate valid, newly discovered axiomatic revolutionary changes in scientific and related knowledge. I emphasize, a discoverer is an individual thinking person whose discovery today's student can master only by replicating the mental processes of discovery, not by repeating after me, by replicating the mental process of discovery, which occurred in that historical moment of discovery by the original discoverer. Such are the grounds for the much-needed industrial revolution of our 21st century, the necessary basis for the new security and development international architecture to the benefit of all nations, missing not a single one. I leave to the following speakers the more precise evaluation of the components of such revolution: fusion, space, and other related improvements or revolutions. I nonetheless need to stress now the much debated question of artificial intelligence, AI. My point is that it does not belong to the domain of the physical economy. It is only a crucial breakthrough appended to the development of the physical economy as conceived by Lin, and in part understood by the present Chinese experts and leadership. AI, as something per se, is based on the gathering of data and processing them at quasi the speed of light to either deduce from sets of past behaviors a new one, or in a more advanced way, to build in its function the capacity to generate generative intelligence, so-called. New ways of behaving, but trapped or within the past environment of sets of rules. you can speak at that level also, the rules-based order. Fixed rules fixed by the creator of the device. In other words, taking example of the squaring of the circle solved by Nicholas of Cusa, the father of the Renaissance, the AY is circumscribed by the circle of the given environment, which has already been discovered. As the multiplication of polygons inside a circle can never reach the type of the circle defined as an incommensurable, nonlinear rotational principle by the number p. Similarly, all the so-called discoveries of the artificial intelligence are bounded by the circle of existing discoveries of physical principles. My illustration here shows the multiplication of data. Data, data, data. They can approximate the level of a new physical principle, but never reach it. You may think here about the epistles of Ptolemy that approximate a correct result, but never the real one, as of course proved by Kepler's discovery of the universal gravitation, the universal law of gravity. In the process of accumulation, the multiplication of data is bound to generate an accumulation of chats, the present society. If AI is mistaken as a means to reach real discoveries of physical principle, does it mean that the AI is not useful? Of course not. It is extremely useful to forecast results in a given environment or prepare a device to take initiatives in such an environment. For example, a rover on Mars that cannot be reached in less than 15 minutes, most of the time more, has to be prepared to choose the best possible option within all specifics of the Martian environment, of the environment in Mars. But this environment, its laws have been established beforehand by the most creative scientists, not by the AI. AI will also save all the painful repetitive aspects of human labor. In that sense, if properly approached, it is going to free us from the chains of deductive, inductive tasks and facilitate the coming industrial revolution. But don't expect AI to inspire it. Lawyers and doctors, for example, are going to be freed from the boring checking of the jurisprudence or the symptoms of a disease. But most of the individual final diagnosis or human pleading in court has to be human. Elon Musk's plans to expand the AI supercomputer, Colossus, in Memphis, Tennessee, is a real advance in its domain, but it is not by multiplying the power of such AI of the future that attempt to deductively estimate the future. It's not like that you can estimate the future through deduction and to discover new physical principles. By construction, is not possible, whatever the sophistication. Moreover, the problem to cover resources needed to cool the power-hungry technology will need a new form of energy based on physical principle, nuclear. I must stress here the declaration of Matteo Bruni, head of the press service of the Holy See, stating that the name of Pope Leo XIV, similarity to that of Leo XIII in his time, is a reference to the workers' well-being, be it yesterday at the age of the first industrial revolution at the end of the 19th century, rerum novarum, and today, in our times, that of the artificial intelligence. It means, I hope, to consider the AI from above in the circles, as Lyndon LaRouche's approach allows us to do. I say that the Chinese have the right conception about it. They call it physical AI, which means not a thing per se, but a key assistant to help to discover and produce in the physical economy. In other terms, a tool of a win-win vision of the physical economies of the future. Hence, their advance over the Western nations in the realm of robotics, connecting the IA to the accomplishment of new physical tasks, while the Americans are more advanced than the Chinese in data processing. The Chinese have outpaced them in the actual deep learning through a careful continuous checking of the process of generative intelligence by human beings to avoid the hallucinations of a free artificial intelligence led to its own way of proceeding. Their advance is, by the way, something that the Trump administration understands better, of course, than its predecessors. But the dilemma cannot be solved with protective tariffs plus an empire of kryptons, at a point where all international chains of production and value are interconnected. The proof of what I'm just saying, unfortunately for us French, our French defense industry, has been given by the shooting down of the French Rafale jets with Indian pilots by the Chinese-made technology of the Pakistani Air Force. It is a deep-seek moment for aerial combat, for air combat, a proof of the Chinese superiority over the West. Like in the deep sea case, it is not a matter of Trumpian money and might. It lies in the basis of an industrial revolution, the combination of physical advanced factors combined with artificial intelligence. This combination is not derived from the artificial intelligence per se, and neither from a brute force military conception, but from devices derived from the civilian economy with a long-term vision. To make a long story short, the Pakistani force is equipped with Chinese fighter planes, J-10C, carrying air-to-air missiles, PL-15, a system of air defense HQ-9, and a WACS ZDQ-03. Its cost of all that for a fully equipped plane is of about, in the Pakistani and the Chinese model, of about $50 to $60 million, while the Indian Rafale costs about $250 million. So the Pakistani model, Chinese model, is 4 times less costly than the French model, and it succeeded. The Rafale was grounded without even chances to fire its missiles before having the opportunity to engage in fight. They were hit from a distance of a few hundred kilometers, allegedly between 150 and 300, and were not even capable to see the enemy visually or even in their radars. The Chinese missiles are hypersonic and can fly at about Mach 4. I don't mention that for the sake of military expertise that I don't have, but as a proof of the pudding of reality. After having stressed the right way to address the challenge of artificial intelligence as a factor in the necessary industrial revolution of the physical economy, I'm going to explain how artificial intelligence is used instead as a weapon of mental manipulation by our enemies. It is a cognitive warfare to destroy everything we stand for. No illusion, if we don't fight appropriately, in an appropriate way, it works. I'm addressing those among you that having been immersed in the digital economies and the cult of images since they were born. But also I'm addressing all of us because it has become a global society phenomenon. Listen to a young adolescent commenting, it's a quote, "We don't meet each other because we have not much to say. But if we are confronted by silence, we send black screens because we are scared if we are not connected. We have even reached the point where the social networks control now the way to watch television. Let's see how it works. It applies weapons of intelligence warfare and of commercial marketing to the population. First, create an environment, then control it from above, making the people believe that it's their own choice. You think you are playing with your smartphone or your computer, but you are being played by them. It works in the following way. Through data processing, you locate violent conflicts or petty issues. Then you introduce algorithms favoring the most opposed opinions. Through that, you create addictions, like a drug, and submersion, and you submerge the participants. Then you cut short the connection. You cut short the connection for a while to create frustration. Finally, you have created a wider and wider groupthink on irrelevant issues, generating violence and the habit to be like an animal, needing enemies to exist and be provided with a dope of the quasi-hypnotic habit of images and more violent images. Thus, you are caught in an artificial universe outside of relevant political issues. You are trapped. You ask for more and more. You are connected more time than you spent at schools or at college or elsewhere in the real world. It's like being put in a mental cage with your willful thinking like a guinea pig. This method of ruling has always existed, but never with the power to connect images and with AI generating continuously an artificial universe with a constant sense of being deprived. You will know how Harari, in his Homo Deus, cynically states that the AI will destroy millions of jobs and that to keep people quiet, you have to immerse them in an ocean of artificial experiences. Of course, such a thing cannot last, but it creates the conditions for the preparation of war, a war of all against all, where man becomes wolves to men through an internalized set of aggressive behaviors. Add to that ChatGPT of the so-called open AI. It provides, when you are less frenzied, with answers on every issue, eliminating polemics and disruptions, and making you digest the average opinion of the neoliberal universe, explaining, for example, the facts about the disease of your dog or the alleged massacre of the Uyghurs at the same level. You are then caught from all sides, deprived of your free judgment. Our fight is not to fall into the trap, and our mission is to prevent the others from falling. This means to measure the danger, to prevent it, but much, much more, to show to most people that you know what it is, and to bring them the higher conception of a universe surpassing sense certainty and formal logics by reflection on the willful means through which we can increase man's power over our universe. In that sense, the Industrial Revolution of the 21st century can only start with the highest form of communication of ideas. The image of the machine or engine of the future does not yet exist, but is potentially within our minds the most advanced form of human communication. I mean, music, as beautifully proved in this conference in our panel with Beethoven's trio and elsewhere. What is in the tip of the human tongue is that the true human language, beyond the existing, usually spoken one, is needed to inspire the discoveries of all physical principles. We are far from it at this moment, in this century, but paradoxically, we are very close at the same time. We do know that to stop the genocide in Gaza is mandatory to be human, to be a human being, and that peace can only be achieved in the long run through shared economic development, creating the conditions for the discovery of new physical principles, and the mobilization of related technologies, the win-win anti-geopolitic revolution of the 21st century for our whole planet Earth. Having in your mind the music of the Daniel Berenbaum, Edward Said, classical Palestinian-Israeli orchestra, the Divan it was called, which one played in Ramallah. Then the paradise and the Peri is with us, as well as the industry of the future. So let's fight like hell, because the gates of hell are so near. But it is then, by contrast, that our minds can better see beyond. They can see the inalienable rights inscribed in our stars, in the stars. So we have no excuse to fail. Thank you.
Our next speaker is William Happer, Professor Emeritus of Physics at Princeton University, former member of the United States National Security Council and the U.S. Department of Energy. Dr. Happer.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis, and thanks to the Schiller Institute for inviting me here. I've met a lot of interesting people. I wish I'd been here for the whole conference. But the title of this session is The Power of Reason to Change the World. And I'm a big fan of reason myself, and but you know, it's not enough, really, you know, and I think we all know that if you want to change the world, you need a lot more than pure reason. Immanuel Kant, for example, is known for his great essay, you know, A Critique of Pure Reason. And one of his quotes was, you know, from the crooked timber of humanity, no one ever made a straight thing, you know. Maybe that's not quite a right translation, but the idea is there. So while respecting reason, we all have to remember that reason needs help from other human factors, in particular from observation and also from courage and persistence. And none of these things are particularly rational, but they're characteristic of successful humans. But let me say a few words about reason, but I don't have a whole lot of time. Reason was sort of the driving force of the European Enlightenment when people were convinced that the world really was rational and, you know, God Almighty was rational and that he had made the world in the most rational way possible, the best of all possible worlds. I think we all remember reading Candide, and his instructor, Pangloss, kept telling him, this is the best of all possible worlds. And how could you know? Well, Newton and Leibniz had invented the calculus, so you could optimize things. You could see what was maximum. And so this idea that somehow the best way of doing things was what actually was happening in the world was very important for the development of my field of physics. This sort of began with Fermat's observation that the way light propagates is it goes from point to point in a way that takes the minimum time, the principle of least time. And this was sort of a fascinating idea, a rational idea that people began to pursue. And this led to the development of Newton's basic mechanics into Lagrangian mechanics, Hamiltonian mechanics, very analytic, calculus-based views of mechanics. And these then led to description of minimum action so a mechanical system does something, you know, a rock falls or a cannonball flies in such a way as to minimize action, which was like the time for light. And indeed, all of that is true. And then it led to the ideas of symmetry, and that their laws of physics don't change with time. And purely rational idea, but that's right. And connected with that symmetry of time is the idea of conservation of energy. So certain symmetries that we think characterize the world that we live in also lead to conservation laws in physics. Conservation of momentum is the symmetry to translation. The universe has to look the same no matter where you are. You go left to right or up or down. Conservation of angular momentum. The universe doesn't care which way you point. The laws of physics are always the same. But, you know, observation kept intruding in all of this. The classical physics that Newton invented and was followed up by the great French mathematical physicists really had no room for practical things like heat engines, you know, and it was pretty clear you could use heat to make engines. That was first developed in the late 1700s in Britain and had an enormous impact, the steam engine. And there was really no room for some of the ideas of steam engines in classical mechanics. Pure reason didn't work there. But by carefully observing that and trying to make the connections, the great French engineer Carnot introduced the basic ideas of entropy and temperature, things that are completely foreign to Newtonian mechanics. And instead of having important quantities like energy and momentum that never change in time that were conserved, the idea came that entropy is something that increases and without limit. So again, big changes came not from pure reason, but from observation and from actually quite practical things. In fact, the culmination of this was statistical mechanics, which combined the ideas of Newton and the ideas of Carnot into the sort of culmination of classical physics, which, by the way, didn't work. You know? So when people really looked carefully at statistical mechanics and physics and electricity and magnetism, it was clear that it was nonsense. It predicted, for example, infinite energy on the electromagnetic field. So everyone knew that the energy of the electromagnetic field was not infinite. And the solution of that problem was quantum mechanics. And so again, pure reason by itself was not able to reason its way to quantum mechanics. It was forced on humanity by the way the world works. So And let me add one final comment. In addition to the real world, a particularly important part of the influence of the real world on development of human culture has been accidents. So if you think about my field of physics, huge numbers of accidents have really led to its development. Nobody thought up the law of induction, which was discovered accidentally by Michael Faraday. Nobody thought up radioactivity, which was discovered accidentally by Becquerel. Nobody thought up neutron stars, which were discovered completely accidentally by pulsars. So one must not underestimate the role of lucky accidents. And so we need to train as many of our young people as possible to be aware of the significance of accidents. You know, there are lots of accidents if you're working in a laboratory, and most of them are just dirt. They don't mean anything. But there are a few that are important, and if you've trained people properly, they will recognize those and follow them up. Finally, let me say that I think the most important characteristic of advances in human culture has been courage. You know, if you've got reason but you're afraid to make a mistake or to try something, you'll never make progress. So I think the other thing we have to somehow teach our young people is courage. Never give up. You know, if you do that, you will make progress. So I do have to apologize. I have a train I need to catch pretty soon, so I'm going to stop here. But if there are any questions, and if there's time.
Yes, there is. There's more than that. There's going to be a response to you from Jason. So, Jason, you want to respond from there? Probably.
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of high. All right. I really appreciate your history of the development of least action. This is near and dear to my heart, Fermat in particular. And I was just reflecting on the fact that Fermat was really provoked into his discovery by confronting the absolutely ridiculous explanation of Descartes for refraction, based on tennis balls and all sorts of nonsense. Now, the fact that Fermat already had a method of maxima and minima meant that even if someone else had that hypothesis like he did, Fermat could actually test it. He could figure out what the angles would be, and that this was enormously important. The other thing that what you brought up made me think about was about how Kepler really demanded the calculus. I mean, very explicitly. He had a principle that was changing all the time. So what you had primary was the differential. He was frustrated that he couldn't write the integral. He didn't use those words. But just, you know, these shortcomings in understanding that demand the breakthroughs, I think, point to the difference between reason and logic. You know, watching Star Trek, you see the Klingons. Whenever they go to the Klingon ship, everything's barbaric, and you'd say, these people would never have a spaceship. And then there's the Vulcans, and they don't have any emotions. And you say, they'd never get the spaceship, because what's the last thing that you brought up? Courage, right? I mean, what courage did Kepler have to stick with it? Because he wanted to know God's mind. That was, you know, that's a big goal. And so there's a passion, I think, that comes with reason. And with logic, I think the predominant emotion is more often rage. So,
well, thank you. I'm a huge admirer of both Kepler and Fermat, as I think you know. And poor Descartes, you know, really didn't have the mathematical tools. He did invent analytic geometry, which was very important later on, but he somehow couldn't grasp the ideas of calculus.
Let me just ask, because you've got, does anybody else on the panel have anything to say? No? Let's take one from the, go ahead.
I mean, this.
We've got a total of, we got about 8 minutes.
Okay, well, I hope this is a useful question and one that maybe can start a small discussion, but something that came up from the panel that we had before the break was this idea of inspiring a new curriculum, or the ideas that we had put forward being the basis for a kind of curriculum, maybe of history. And I'm wondering if you ever think about designing curricula, or how you think about the problems of reversing the extended degradation of the teaching of sciences in the United States.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we're doing a very good job of educating this generation of students, and I'm not quite sure how to fix that. I think, in reality, one of the biggest problems is getting good teachers into the classroom and not harassing them all the time. I have a son who teaches science and math in a school in North Carolina, and is constantly being harassed by people from the outside who've never been in a classroom, who've never had to deal with students. And so I think that as we work on the curriculum, we also have to work on getting good teachers and getting them properly respected and properly rewarded. My own choice would be to go very much toward the basics, make sure people still learn the multiplication tables, make sure they can still write an English sentence that makes sense, that would help a lot.
Hi. I kind of wanted to just follow up on the topic that was at hand here. Dr. Happer, recently you've been a controversial figure, obviously, because of your outspokenness against the green agenda, right? So there are attempts right now to indoctrinate young people into thinking that they're poisonous or they're the plague on the earth because they drink water and they breathe out carbon dioxide and breathe in oxygen, of course. Now, you are an authority on atmospheric science, given all of the discoveries that you've done in over the last 40 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you've personally gone after the sort of climate change lobby that has tried to implement these policies of degrowth over the last 40 years or so?
Well, thanks, Jose. Let me just say a few words about the climate situation. Since about 1980, there's been this buildup of alarm about climate change, global warming, due to human emissions of carbon dioxide mostly, but also methane and nitrous oxide. And this is an amazing, it's sort of a perfect storm. There are large numbers of very decent, honest people who've been badly misled, and they think there really is a problem, and that the planet needs saving, and they would like to save it. It's an issue that's bigger than themselves. And they've simply been misinformed. A second driver has been people who are opportunists, because to save the planet, you have to spend a lot of money. And so why not spend it on my method of saving the planet? So these are the purveyors of, sustainability, of, renewable energy, and they're making out very well. Lots and lots of your money, taxpayers' money, is going to systems that really are junk. They don't work. And then there's my community, the research community, who has just been astounded at all the money that has poured into academia from Washington and from private foundations to save the planet. And so the last thing most academics want is to cut off that river of money. And so although many academics know perfectly well that most of this is nonsense, they're not willing to speak up for fear of shutting off the spigot. So it's going to be a difficult thing to reverse. It will eventually reverse, because the policies that are being put in place are suicidal, and people aren't that stupid. Eventually they'll realize this is suicide and we have to change course.
Thank you.
Hi. Dr. Happer, thank you for speaking with us today. Yes, thinking about the current policy, what you're describing is this suicidal policy of the green agenda. But I was wondering if there is a capability to reverse this so-called climate change, or or a real sustainability policy. What's a more positive policy that we should be implementing to reverse those changes or have a sustainable environment? And what do you think should be researched more as a positive policy outlook?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I maybe didn't fully understand the question. As you know, I'm a little bit deaf, but let me try and answer. I think the most important thing that we can do for the world is to make the world prosperous. Because if you look around, where is the environment a mess? It's where there's poverty. And where is the environment nice? It's where there are well-to-do people, you know, who can afford to pay attention to the environment. So I think a major goal of the world should be to lift as many people out of poverty as possible. The best way to do that has always been inexpensive energy, inexpensive food, and all of that requires the use of fossil fuels, at least for now. And so to demonize fossil fuels when that's the one thing that will really clean up the environment is just crazy. I don't know why we're doing it. You know, talk about the power of reason. There's no reason at all to this.
Thank you.
Dr. Happer has to go at this point. He's raised several epistemological issues with which there is high controversy, I know perfectly well, as do all of us in this room. We cannot take this up at this time, and what we will do, I think makes sense, is to have a symposium, which I'm sure Dr. Happer would agree we ought to do, on these deeper questions. I'm saying that because this is someone who knew Oppenheimer and Teller personally. It is also someone who's brought up things concerning Kant and other things with which some of us severely disagree. But the issue is, where has inquiry gone in the academic community? The ability to have people get together and disagree and say why, and to come from that, out of the discussion, knowing more or knowing that they know less. That's what academia used to do, right? And that's what's needed. And so we want to thank him for the fact he was able to come. And let's do that. Really important. Okay, so the next speaker is Dr. Kelvin Kemp of South Africa, nuclear physicist, past chairman of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, and now actually recently appointed to a commission, 24-person commission in South Africa against the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction.
Yep. Thank you. It should be a bit easier to see the slides with the lights off here. Is there global warming? Yes. Is there climate change? Yes. But there always has been global warming and there always has been climate change. If you look back to early 1400s, the end of the 1300s, the Vikings had farms in Greenland. They had sheep. That's well known. There were farms there. And around about 1410, they left because it got too cold. Then we went into the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age is well documented. You can see paintings like that that hang in galleries and so on. That is the River Thames during the Little Ice Age, which is round about the time of Shakespeare. And the time of, up around about 1620 or so on, when the Pilgrim Fathers came here to the US. Apparently part of the reason was it was so cold there that food was scarce, situation was bad, and so people were easily persuaded to leave the country and go elsewhere. It was the same time, 1652, that the first settlers from Europe came to South Africa, so there's a great parallel. So now, does this affect the weather? Yes, it does affect the weather, but it affects the weather over like a 30 or 40-year period. When you see newspapers say, oh, the weather's changed because of climate change, this year is not like last year, that's nonsense. To see a change in climate, you ought to wait like a generation. It isn't something that happens like that. Mark Twain said, climate is what you expect, but weather is what you get. And so, what is actually going on? Are there increased weather events? You hear all the time, look at the severity of the weather, look at the number of extra weather events. It's not true. Like here in the US, for example, the decade during which there were most hurricanes was the 1940s. It wasn't the last decade. During the last decade, there have been large insurance claims. And you sometimes see, look at the increase in the severity of the hurricanes because there's an increased insurance claim. Nonsense. There isn't increased insurance because there's more buildings to smash up and more money being spent on insurance. It's got nothing to do with the frequency of the hurricane. You find also what's going on is complete exaggerations and falsehoods in the press. That type of thing. Africa is on the front line of climate change. Nonsense. You find that they say Africa is above average in the increase in temperature. A few days later, Europe is above average on the increase in temperature. A few days later, the Antarctic is above average. Everybody's above average, and therefore everybody should panic. This is ridiculous. So what is actually going on? What is actually going on is that people pushing some of these agendas are looking for a change in the social order. See, look, climate struggle is the class struggle. There's people striving for socialism and trying to destroy the classes that are seen by them to be the ruling classes and the problem. So this is the type of thing that happens. Greenpeace and so on, look at that crowd. They're possibly all nice people, but they'll come along and demonstrate against climate change or something like that. If you stopped a lot of those people and said, what's the difference between a molecule and an atom? They probably don't know. What is infrared radiation? They probably haven't a clue, but they're against it. You know, and this is the sort of thing you see. So now you ought to say to yourself, what is the elephant in the room here? There it is. Where I come from, that can actually happen. Those are real elephants, by the way. And so now you've got to say, what is happening? What is happening now is that there's a social order demand going on. And this whole green story is the pathway that they are using to try and induce a change. So you get this type of thing, system change, not climate change, and that's the reality of it. But you don't hear that in the newspapers. If you read their websites, that they make it quite clear. They want to block the wealthier element of society from being the people in control. That's the type of thing. So they don't want you to eat red meat because the wealthier people eat red meat. They don't want you to fly in airplanes because the wealthier people fly in airplanes. You shouldn't have a big house because it's the wealthier people have the big house. You mustn't have a big car. That type of thing. If you look at it, you'll find that message all of the time. Everything they're trying to block is a social issue like that. See, socialism or extinction. So somehow you've got to go to stop the planet becoming too terrible to live on, you've got to go socialist, which means somebody wants to control you. That's what's going on. So they're create a religious type of thing, that there's this utopia, the beautiful planet we ought to strive for. But there's the enemy, the devil. The enemy is industry. And these are the guys who are preventing us from getting there. So they go into like a religious fervor, and they get people like that, for example, who says, leading voice in the battle against climate change. I've never met Leonardo. I'd like to meet him, but I bet you he doesn't know too much about infrared radiation. So they get these Hollywood types to come along and be part of these things that you all feel that you're striving against this enemy, and the enemy is industry. And so you pull all the normal people along. See, there's Leonardo now with the other crowd around him. And the idea is here we are fighting against the enemy. And the enemy is an amorphous industry and something like that. So you can understand where they're driving. We don't have many Hollywood types on our side. There's only one that I actually know of, and that's this one here. Yeah. All right. All right, so we've heard now about the elephant in the room, but what we also have now is the rhinos in the road. And so there's numbers of other things. So what happens is that the green types like that as well try to put obstacles in the way. You say, well, if we found a solution, you'd imagine they'd be pleased about a solution. No, they don't. Like, for example, they're opposed to nuclear power. And look at that daffodil there telling you not to use nuclear power. How much do you think she really knows? Now, nuclear power does not emit anything when it's running. No carbon dioxide, no solid waste, no liquid waste, nothing like that. You'd think they'd say, gee, here's a solution. Now, as soon as you point out there's a solution, we're opposed to that too. We will make up all sorts of reasons why we're opposed to it. The reason why they're opposed to it is it puts a lot of power in the hands of some powerful entity. That's what it's about. So here, no, by far the best thing is everybody have a little solar panel on your own roof, and you all become part of this collective of putting electricity in. That doesn't work. Now, let me just show you something now which is quite telling. Look at this picture here. This is the energy density of various things. On the left, there's sugar. That's megajoules per kilogram. In South Africa, you see on the cornflakes boxes at the supermarket, kilojoules per gram. And the ladies look to see how much energy you're going to have, whether you're going to put on weight or not, on what's on the box. It's the same number. I don't know if what you guys use, whether it's per gram or pound or whatever. But there's sugar, 19, coal, 24, fat, 39, petrol, 46, uranium, 76 million. Look at the difference. Anybody with half a brain would say we've got to go for uranium as the solution. So now we say, now where are we going with this? What are we doing? Right. So now we get to the next phase. We've got to have the hippo in the hotel. So, and what happens is that certain countries and companies start to exploit this. And I say, oh, the governments are saying you mustn't do that, they mustn't do that. And we find that they come to South Africa and to Africa. That guy went right into the restaurant. And they come here and they say, okay, we're now going to take advantage of this, and you are not allowed to use coal anymore. We make you feel so guilty about using coal. But what you really should do is use wind and solar, which you must buy from us. And we will give you a big loan to make you feel morally good so that you buy from us. Then you repay the loan to us, and you pay us monthly rent, and you this, and you this, and you find that you've been captured by them. And that's been happening a large amount in Africa and elsewhere in the world, and it makes us rather bitter and upset that we find that they come along and they morally squeeze, and they say things like, we're going to start blocking your exports, we'll block this, we'll stop that, and we'll do that, unless you do what is the morally correct thing to do, but you ought to do it through us because we're going to make the money. They don't say that. So now you find yourself being bullied into doing as you're told. And it doesn't go down so well in certain circles, you can imagine. And then they say things like, if you put in solar, look at all the job opportunities and look at everything you'll be getting, and those are the job opportunities. And, you know, they don't say you're going to be a machinist and a computer operator. You get that sort of job. That's what happens. A while back, I went on a business trip to one of these dry areas, and I was in a little hotel somewhere or other. And I went down for breakfast, and I was sitting all on my own. There were about 4 other people in the restaurant in the morning. And I'm the sort that likes to chat. And a young guy came down, and he went to sit on his own. I called him and said, "Why don't you come and join me?" And he came and joined. He was in his 20s, so he came and joined me. So I said, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And he told me his name was a German fellow out here for a couple of months, installing solar panels, solar systems. And so I said, "Oh, really? Tell me about yourself." And he made the mistake of not asking me who I am or what I am. So I said, "How do these solar panels work?" And so on and so on. Had he asked me and I was a physicist, he'd know I know, but he didn't do that. So on we went, and I said, "By the way, when you put all this stuff in, surely dust lands on it." "Yes," he says. So I said, "What's the solution for the dust on the panel?" He says, "We don't know. That's South Africa's problem." You know, and I said, "Well, how do you do it in Germany?" He said, "No, we have these little machines like windscreen wipers on motor cars. They squirt water. Over there, we don't have any water." And that is utterly immoral. That these guys have sold us the solution. And when you say, "What about cleaning the dust off?" I said, "That's your baby." Now, if somebody went in and said, "We're going to put a nuclear power station in there," and they said, "What about this, transporting the waste?" We said, "Oh, no, that's your baby." It would never have been allowed. But this is the sort of thing that happens. Now let me show you some other mind-stretching exercises here. This is the size of Africa. Africa is larger than China, the United States, the whole of Europe, India, and the UK and Japan added together. The standard Mercator map projection was drawn from people out of Europe based on Europe, so it gives a highly inaccurate representation when you actually look at it properly. That's how big it is. And if you're ever having people coming from some European country say, "Africa must do as we say," this type of thing. Let me take that one step further now. This is South Africa. And I live in Pretoria, which is up at the top of that black line there. Well, you can see it higher up where the coal. All of our coal sits in the top end there, the northeast. Cape Town at the bottom. That black line is the same distance as Rome to London. So the distance between Pretoria and Cape Town is Rome to London. South Africa is the same size as the whole of Western Europe added together. Is this got a laser in it? No. Oops. No, it's just oops, it's going forward. It doesn't go in reverse here. Oh, great, thank you. I thought there might be a laser. All right, now, in the beigey color area there, that's a particularly dry area. There's an area called the Karoo, and it's considered quite beautiful in an utterly arid way. It's covered in little bushes or nothing, sand or bushes no higher than about your knee. It's quite famous for lamb. It's called Karoo lamb. If you ever come across it, have some. The bushes are bitter because of the dryness, and it gives the lamb a particular tang. So it's quite famous for that. Then, that Karoo is larger than the whole of Germany. The Karoo has got virtually no people living in it. That's what like Germany now. That's what Germany looks like. You find the fields are all touching. There's no spare space there. The wind turbines, they try and squeeze in like that. This is the Karoo. You go hundreds of kilometers across it. I took that picture myself on a day when the traffic density is low. Had I taken it on a day when the traffic density was high, there would have been another car in the picture. Those are the little bushes, and it goes on like that for kilometer after kilometer after kilometer after kilometer. And yet the Germans come to us and say, "We've got a solution for you." You say, "Your whole flipping country will fall in our desert." And they don't take that into account. So we have now very long power lines, like that. 760,000 volts, the highest high altitude and long distance power lines in the world. 1,000-kilometer power lines. They go right across the whole of Europe from from London to beyond Moscow. And we have to run these things. And they're high altitude, so the air is thin. So the lightning strikes on these are serious. So there's a lot of research being put into it so they don't get lightning strikes and knock the power. So we're absolute experts on how to do that sort of thing. And yet people come from Europe and tell us they've come to tell us how to do it properly. And it's always, but you must buy from us. So we've got to go along and say, let us celebrate what we know. Let's push what we know what we're doing. By the way, the helmets, there's a big thing in South Africa. Those are mining helmets, and people take them and paint on them and cut holes in them and do all sorts of things. So it's something that irritates us a lot, and I think it's worth it for people to bear in mind. It's not nice when some bigger country or other country comes along and says, do as you're told. That doesn't go down well. So in Africa as well, there's millions of people that have got no electricity. 600 million have got no electricity across that vast area. I've said before that if you built a new coal-fired power stations across Africa, you'd reduce the CO2 output. How? Those people are all using wood fires and cow dung fires. They put all sorts of rubbish into the atmosphere. If you put a clean-burning coal-fired power station in, you'd reduce the CO2 and the muck because they'd stop burning the fires and the dung. A while ago, I did some consultancy work in Zambia, and I had to drive out of the capital for a couple of 100 kilometers. I had a driver who was driving me. And as we went up, there were fellows on the side of the road. It was a Friday I went up, because they took me for a weekend and that before I started the work on the Monday. As we drove up on the side of the road, there's like wigwams of logs, and these are logs this diameter, standing about that high, and these things are piled on the side of the road, but lots of them. So I said to the driver, what's that? Because you don't see that in South Africa. He said, oh, those are trees they're selling to the people who are going home for the weekend so they can burn them in the fires. So these guys are cutting down the trees next to the road, carrying the logs to the side of the road and selling them to the passing vehicles that are going 200 kilometers back to where the family lives out in the bush. So that's the environmentally friendly aspect as well. They're cutting down all the trees and selling the trees on the side of the road. So you have to look at what's actually going on and not guess from Germany, then come here and then tell us what we got to do because the Germans think it's the right answer. We hear also about how much there's resources can be minimized and that by doing that, but this is a crew of guys laying the foundations now for wind turbines. I took that picture myself. I went out to have a look. That's a crew. You can see all the metal in the background. That metal there is the base. Huge amounts of steel per one. There's the concrete. That's me. I'll tell one of those guys to take the photograph of me. That's the concrete base. You know how much iron and steel and concrete and that goes in, and there's pipes there for the cables, and the cables go underground. It's a massive operation to put those in. When you see them after, you see the little thing with the propeller turning and the indications in the press, oh, there's some simple little, it's not, it's a big engineering exercise to do that. Now you can imagine one day when you decide to take it down, do you think they're going to come and dig this thing up and take it away? Not a chance. Then meantime, if you have a look there, this is also a picture I took myself, and I don't know who they are. That's Koeberg Nuclear Power Station down by Cape Town. Because the coal's right at the other end, in about the 1960s, the South African government decided to go nuclear. That power station in April celebrated its 40th anniversary of operation. It produces South Africa's cheapest electricity by half of the next one up. And it's going fine. It's just been given a 20-year extension legally, so it can carry on for another 20 years. There's been a refurbishment, so we're good to go. And I was walking down the beach, and I took that picture of those 4 people, and I thought this was their dog. And a few months ago, I gave a presentation in Johannesburg, and I showed this, and some guy leapt up from the audience and said, "Hey, that's my dog." And he said, "I live there." And he said, every so often the dog just disappears, and I always wondered where he went. And I said, "Well," okay, so that's Koeberg, like from the ocean side. If you go to the other side, that's what it looks like from the landward side. So really, the greenies, the rock around the rainforest crowd, are a problem. They look as if they're morally right, and they try and pull people along in the religious fervor that they project, but really they're a problem. And so really, it is time that that sandal brigade pulled their socks up. So, where are we? So now, I'm chairman of a company called Stratic Global, which is wanting to build a nuclear power station, a small modular reactor in Pretoria. And we're well on the way to get going with the first one. We were the first in the world to start developing a commercial small modular reactor, by the way, 30 years ago now. We looked at South Africa. I was involved in the beginning, and as you saw that picture, the coal's all up there. The nuclear power station was put down at the bottom at the other end of the black line to basically balance it up. But we still have a problem because the whole inland area has got little power, because the only other option is hydro, and South Africa's got no water. Well, not fresh water inland. We've got two oceans, one on each side we can desalinate. But one thing we're short of is water. We've got everything else, but not water. So we came to the conclusion that the only way we could put power in the middle is it had to be not coal or not gas. We don't have much in the way of gas, although they've found maybe there is some there. So it had to be non-coal, non-whatever. So of our own accord, we came to the conclusion it had to be nuclear. This wasn't a green inducement. And then we wanted it to be not water-cooled, because all the reactors tend to be water-cooled on the coast. So we said, let's make it gas-cooled. So it's helium gas-cooled nuclear power station, a small modular reactor, called the HTMR 100, high temperature modular reactor. The modular is that you make it in pieces indoors and you carry the pieces out, and a la Lego, you put it together out on the site, rather than have all the welding and that out on site. You try and minimize the site construction. You go for mass construction indoors. That's what the finished reactor looks like, the whole reactor. The red line there is ground level. That is all underground. That sticks above, and then there's a ventilation stack there through which all air goes. Any air that gets into the building can only go up there where there are radiation monitors, and so if anything happens and any radiation comes out, alarms ring up there. So that's what that looks like. That's what the actual reactor looks like. A human there is about this big in the picture. Now we design them to go into service. That is called the Kudu design. That's one of our designs that we're going to Savannah. That's the reactor there. Because one of the Greens' objections is there's this horrible industrial building sitting in a pretty area. So we said, okay, we'll stop that. So we appointed architects, there's whole plans. So that's that one. That's the Kudu. Then we got approached by Arab country, and we've designed for an Arab country. And there's the reactor, one reactor up there, and you can see what it looks like now if you want it in sandy conditions. That's called the Oryx. And then we have the Sable. That one there has got 10 reactors. The system is designed that one control room can control 10 reactors. And in fact, we've been working on linking many in different countries. So you can have 20 different countries through the internet, monitor from a central monitoring station. So you can see the temperatures and pressures. And if anything starts to go wonky, you can call them and say, hey guys, do you know that your pressure is rising there? And if they're not all, they're probably aware, but if they're not aware, you collectively come to some method to go and help them out. That country, oh, I won't identify it, but anyway, this is what's happening. These are the solutions. This is the answer. That is a fuel ball, which we have made in Pretoria. That has 9 grams of uranium inside it, and grains about the size of sugar grains, each coated with multiple layers for various reasons. We can make those things, and have made them, and they've been tested. The United States currently cannot make those. We design for the US. We've done 2 US designs, and we've got a factory that is now in a position to produce those. This is part of the system that makes those balls. 6 of those balls will produce all the electricity for a family of 4 for 10 years. So a lady can go to the supermarket and come home with 4 balls, 6 balls, and that's your electricity for your children's school career, is that type of thing. And this is also part of the system. It's in Pretoria. So we have to now trumpet the success there. And what happens is where we have another impediment is that being in Africa, nobody wants to believe us. If certain European companies or something say, we're going to do that, the newspapers say, okay, and they publish it. If we say we're going to do that, a whole lot of people say, we don't believe you. You guys live in mud huts. So we have an extra burden to say we actually know how to cut and bolt and weld and so on, which other people don't have. South Africa also has a nuclear reactor outside Pretoria, which is one of the biggest producers of nuclear medicine in the world. It's the only reactor in the world that runs 365 days a year, 24 hours a day producing nuclear medicine. And one of the biggest customers is the United States. We send almost daily exports. It daily exports 2 or 3 loads per day, every day of the year from there. These are guys loading nuclear medicine into canisters. The yellow is a glass window about that thick. The yellow is to make it it's radiation proof. They can do that without getting cooked. And every 3 minutes, somebody somewhere in the world is injected with medicine from nuclear medicine from South Africa, and every 3 hours, somebody's life is saved continuously. It's something to be proud of, and nobody knows about it, not even our own people. The times are changing now in favor of nuclear. I think to myself, what a pity now. If only this had happened 20 years ago. I wish I was 20 years younger today, you see. In the last 3 or 4 days now, President Trump has announced a 400% increase in the target for nuclear for the US, and he's also announced a complete overhaul of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission because they were causing too much blockage in the legal pathway. And so US has come out now very much in favor. Just recently, too, I gave via Zoom evidence into the state legislature of Maine in favor of nuclear in Maine as well, which I was pleased to be able to do. And many countries now are going nuclear. Just in the last few days, Germany said, okay, they're prepared to change their position and go nuclear as well. So it's snowballing, because it's the only answer. And I must say that the science and engineering people generally are poor at marketing. They'll go and sit around the science table or engineering coffee table, aren't we badly treated? Look at this, nobody's nice to us. If you say, well, you stand up and tell someone, no, that's not me, I don't do that sort of thing. So we open to attacks quite easily. And that's where the greenies would go and have these demonstrations in the street and whip up public support, and there'd be little opposition. However, things are changing. There's now a group called Mothers for Nuclear, like this. You see, dear Greenpeace, please drop your opposition to nuclear energy. And it's lovely to see, particularly young women. Look at that. Save clean nuclear, Mothers for Nuclear, and so on. And this is great to see this type of thing. There's also individuals around the world. This girl is a fashion model in Brazil, and her name is Isabella Bumka. And there's dramatic pictures of her on the internet with flowing dresses at fashion shows, and she's now pro-nuclear. There's also that one called Zion Lights in England. It's not a real name, but she uses that as her pro-nuclear thing, and she puts up tables in the street and challenges people to argue with her. And then we get Princium Tombeni, who's she'll be thrilled to know that she's got this sort of response here. And she's doing really well by herself in Pretoria. So what we have to do now, the theme of this is look into the future for the next 50 years. So let's look into the future for the next 50 years and see what you see there, the helmets again. Let's have a look and say, what's the reality of the future? The reality of the future is stop all this nonsense about this climate change stuff killing you and so on and so on. It's not going to. It's not real. The psychology has become real. The laws have come into place. There's all sorts of stuff to the point to which every second person says, we've got to look at the challenges. International trade, climate change. It always comes in as if it's like a religious thing. You've got to say something like that to acknowledge that you understand. But it's false, as Dr. Happer has pointed out. He's an absolute, Dr. Happer is a world authority on infrared going through the atmosphere, from weapons development work and so on and so forth. But when he stands up and says it's not like that, 6 greenies go along and say, but he's wrong. People say, well, listen to them. And yet this chap's a world expert in the field. So finally, we need to look at, in our own case, like with Africa, we need the wisdom of Africa, that we understand our circumstance, we understand what's going on, with a newer generation to say, look, let's pass on what we know and then use our brains. My son took that picture, so I'm rather bucked with it. And then finally, there's Einstein. Common sense is that collection of prejudices and misconceptions that you pick up at the age of 18. So don't do it, okay? It's all too, well, it's common sense, so-and-so, we better do it. You say, why don't you stop and think first? It's much better to stop and think than just leap to the common sense because he says so, and he says so, and he says so. So that's the end of what I want to say. Don't just use common sense. Sit down and think and say, is this realistic? Is it possible? Is it logical? Is it a whole bunch of other things? And investing a few minutes in thinking about it rather than just leaping to a conclusion, you're likely to get the right answers. Thanks, folks.
The actual South Africa. Our next speaker, be careful. What happened? Chair collapsed. You okay? Steve Durst. Okay, our next speaker is Stephen Durst, International Lunar Observatory Association. Do we have him? Ah, yes, you were there, sir. Welcome.
Hello, aloha. Okay, let me see if I can get some slides here. Don't think, Dennis, I don't know that my slides are showing.
Okay.
I know you have them there too.
We're told that you're okay.
How's that? Okay, all right. All right.
Dave, just tell him to shoot. You see them? Okay, great.
All right, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you fine and we can see your slides.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm Steve Durst, as Dennis introduced me, from the International Lunar Observatory Association here in Hawaii, on Hawaii Island. Also the editor and publisher of the Space Age Publishing Company, which publishes our Space Calendar weekly for some 40 years without fail every Monday. I was invited by one of your Schiller Institute colleagues, William Jones, to speak about a common interest we have in lunar exploration for the 21st century. And I had understood that the topic of this panel 6 was the Industrial Revolution 4.0, space fusion, and AI. I had not realized that there was also the title for this panel on the power of reason to change the universe. And in this short presentation, maybe I can make a case for a reasonable case for the value of lunar enterprise. And developing the eighth continent of the moon to change life on Earth and beyond throughout the universe. I'd like to start with this first slide that we developed back in 2017 for whatever the incoming administration of the US was at that time. And we did send that out to that new administration, and there was some early interest in a big picture. Now, 8 years later, 2025, within the spirit of the conference here, of looking ahead 50, even 75 years, I think it's an iconic year in an iconic century, the pivotal 21st century, the first century of the new millennium, in fact. And here we are, 2025 Q1, quarter of the way through this century. And we've been advocating and publishing and promoting the need and the benefit of taking a century, a 21st century perspective on our future as a species, of what we humans can do with all of our resources, the 200 and something countries and 8.2 billion humans, and advocating that universities, well, not just space agencies, not just NASA, but the leading space agencies and all space agencies around the world, take a 21st century perspective on what theoretically could be done with the resources that we have, with wise policy and reason. So the challenge is to organizations like the Schiller Institute, universities and think tanks and aerospace companies and enterprises, to take a big picture look at the rest of the century with the idea that what we do now, quarter of the way through, could indeed be decisive and determining how things develop. You can see with the chart, we're down in the lower left. The moon and Mars are certainly within high profile and reach robotically, and before long, in fact, a few short years, humans will be returning to our closest neighbor, the moon, for good, we hope, and onto not just Mars, but what's after Mars. And I and my colleagues very much believe, we had some discussions earlier about Saturn and Jupiter. I think Dennis Speed made references to them, where I think the destinies of humanity in the 21st century will be determined in that area of the solar system, where more than 90% of the planetary mass of the solar system exists. We saw the reference to 274 moons of Saturn and well over 100 of Jupiter. Imagine the systems that could evolve there once humans reach there. So that's the big perspective we're taking. Now, on a practical, reasonable course, how do we do that? What's the first big step? And for us, and I think in the 20th century, at least in America, the consensus was the most significant event of the 20th century was becoming a multi-world species, was humans on the moon, ahead of the bomb. It's rather interesting that a census was taken at year 2000, remember Y2K, as to what just passed the century before. And the journalists rated the atomic bomb as the most significant event of the 20th century. And historians reversed that and said that humans on the moon eclipsed the nuclear weapon as the most significant, influential event. And I think history will prove that. Another interesting development, I think, that I experienced last week before, at a major space conference in New Delhi, in India, was the growing understanding among space agencies and space business people, explorers of all sorts, that the moon was part of the Earth. It's part of the Earth-Moon system. It's clearly geophysically by Newtonian gravitational physics. It's Earth's moon. It's the eighth continent, as it's increasingly referred to around the world. Now, our organization, the International Lunar Observatory Association, is, I think, interesting that Professor Happer earlier talked about the importance of observation as well, of course, as courage. And that's what we do with ILOA to expand human understanding of the cosmos through observation from our moon. We're involved in advancing the next frontier of astronomy, which I think will be very, very dynamic and exciting and productive one. The flagship that we've been working on off and on for really 20 years to conduct both observation and communication, ideally from the summit of one of the tall mountains at the south pole of the moon, rather poetically titled Peaks of Eternal Light, because they're high enough and they catch the oblique sun rays more than the usual 50% daylight day-night cycle is at most of the moon at the South Pole. And that's where we're headed, because that's where highest detection of ice water, hydrogen molecules, has been detected at the South Pole of the moon. Our mission, and we are close to contracting a carrier to take us towards the South Pole of the moon. In fact, to take us, the destination hasn't been chosen yet, but near where Artemis 3 is due to land. And I think many of you may know that's the mission that's destined to take the first woman to the moon, which personally I think will be the signature event of the 21st century when it happens. And another tribute to reason, I hope, in this presentation and maybe in our planning going forward is one doesn't have to go all the way to Mars to become a multi-world civilization. It's that close. And I think as we return to the moon, like Armstrong and Aldrin said on the plaque they left, "In peace for all," we'll find that indeed the Earth-Moon system enables multi-world species development. With our little mission, we hope to image the Milky Way galaxy with our first, ideally the first image, but the primary image. You see the graphic on the right there that artist Michael Carroll did for us about 10 years ago with our idealized lander with both radio and optical telescopes on the summit, on one of the peaks at the South Pole, imaging the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And there's never been an image of the Milky Way from the surface of the moon, an optical image in this century. And the reason we're trying to get that first image as an educational and inspirational and directional step would be the thought that, and the hope that that image, the first image of the Milky Way galaxy from the surface of the moon, will have a similar effect as the first image of the whole Earth from the surface of the moon did in the 20th century. And you know that image of the whole Earth did catalyze a dramatic revolution in thinking about our Earth and its place in the universe. The ecological and environmental movements were direct results of those Earthrise images from Apollo 8 and beyond. So we hope to catch the first image of the Milky Way, if not expand proof of concept astronomical observations. We have invited very distinguished astronomers and observatories from all around the world to participate in proof of concept observations. Here in Hawaii, some of you who have had the experience to visit this 50th Aloha state of the USA and to ascend Mauna Kea, by some measures the largest mountain, the tallest mountain in the world from the seafloor, which hosts 13 world-class international observatories. And we hope to expand Hawaii astronomy to the moon, and that interactivity of instruments on the moon working with the magnificent world-class observatories on Hawaii should extend Hawaii's astrophysical excellence into the 21st century. And finally, as I mentioned, we are affiliated with a communications publishing company, and we hope to utilize the communications capability required for science and astronomical data transmission for commercial communications as well. In particular, we'll be launching a campaign next month with our new landing partner for ILO-1 to publicize lunar broadcasting. Now, I won't go into, I know there are not too many astronomers here. We have many secondary goals for observation, one being Earth observation, long duration observation of Earth from the moon, extremely valuable in many usages for navigation, communication, transportation. And of course, we're going to the moon to observe the local lunar surface developments and participate in the permanent build-out of humanity on the moon and beyond. I have a couple of other slides if we get around to the question of property rights on the moon. But to get back to what we have done, I mentioned our flagship upcoming. We're aiming for 27. And that it may be dependent on the SpaceX Starship for our ILO-1 flagship in 27. We have precursors, one that's been completed last year after 16 years of perseverance, the ILO-X, the experimental mission that was aboard the first commercial lander to the moon last year. Intuitive Machines did not have they landed without a crash, and thus became the first to successfully land on the moon, but it wasn't totally successful. Our instruments were tipped over along with the rest of the spacecraft, and we got great incoming images of the lunar surface and a few, not what we expected, from the moon. Looking up on the lower left, you'll see an image from of the sun overexposed, dusty on the lunar surface. The lights to the left of that image on the lower left are the actual spacecraft on which our instruments were located. You can see those two instruments in the center images. The one on top with the fingers was a wide field of view, which took that exposed solar image, and the one below it, with the baffle, a narrow field of view that was to image the galaxy center. And you see on the right the images before landing that our instruments took. But it was very satisfying, nevertheless. The instruments were built by our partners in Canada. It was an international mission. We did get the 341 images, and those two instruments, those two cameras, are on the moon. They belong to ILO-A. Whether they'll be revisited, dusted up, and powered up remains to be seen. We do have significant digital assets that we haven't fully utilized for our Lunar Broadcasting Initiative upcoming. And speaking of upcoming, we have a mission, another precursor mission to our flagship ILO-1, and called ILO-C. It was one of the international missions chosen by the China Space Agency for inclusion on their Chang'e 7 moon lander, which is going to the South Pole next year. It is likely to be the first American-Chinese international lunar science mission on the moon, a science astrophysics mission. It's a four-party mission. You'll see the signatories down below. Myself from ILOA, the gentleman to my right from the National Astronomical Observatories of China, to his right, the tall young fellow from Thailand, and to my left, Dr. Quentin Parker from Hong Kong University. And there's the camera down below to the left of the four of us there, being built by a big industrial company in Beijing, pictured in the lower right. The Beijing Institute of Space Mechanics and Electronics has built all of the successful lunar cameras on the Chang'e program, as well as the Mars landing camera. And our collaboration with China, because it's been so enterprising and exemplary in many ways on the moon, does go back going into 2 decades. We collaborated on the first China lander on the moon, Chang'e 3, about 10, 11 years ago. That was the first lander of any kind in the 21st century on the moon. And again, not too many people are aware that China's been operating continuously on the lunar surface for more than 11 years. That's a fact. Finally, we're working with both of the human spaceflight programs and the India Space Agency. Those are the only 3 countries to date that have declared their intention to send their citizens to the moon through their own resources, namely India, China, and USA. And by USA, of course, that's in collaboration with the space station partners, Japan, Europe, Canada, Russia, yes. And we think the multinational, multipolar collaborations that China has, the ILRS program, the International Lunar Research Station. USA initiated the Artemis Accords. India has its own trajectory, and of course, the independent commercial sector has its own goals. So we do think that the moon makes a good reasonable case for changing life here on Earth in the rest of this century and beyond. And as we say here in Hawaii, aloha. Hope some of you have a chance to visit the 50th Aloha State here. Thank you for your attention. And thank you. Well, thank you, Dennis. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Durst. We have 2 other speakers, and the first of those is Cody Jones, who is a high school teacher, an educator. He's teaching at Chester High School in Pennsylvania, which is an exemplary institution. But he is also a former member of the LaRouche Youth Movement and of the LaRouche Basement Team. So, Cody Jones.
All right, thank you. Unfortunately, Dennis forgot to tell me to prepare my stand-up routine, as some of our other distinguished speakers were able to present, but I'll do my best here. So, before we get to the quote, people have seen, obviously, a theme that's run through the conference is that of dialogue. a dialogue with cultures, with nations, with people. And here, in the domain of science, we're talking about a dialogue with the universe, a dialogue with the creator, perhaps. So on that note, here's a quote from Max Planck, who says, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." Now, if you didn't know who Max Planck was, you might say, oh, is he some New Age guru who knows the secret? But in fact, this is someone who is a rigorous scientist, the discoverer of the quantum, in fact, and who his great insight was that mind is fundamental. So what really is he getting at here? So if we look to the next quote, so here's how Mr. LaRouche addressed it in various places, in particular Project A, where he says, "Is it the case that because our mental apparatus is so organized as the apparatus of knowledge, that the only form of universal physical knowledge we need to know is in that form? That whatever form universal physical laws external to that form we might expect to be, we do not take into account? Or does it mean that universal physical laws are efficiently in the form they must be properly represented by the mind to accommodate to the imagery of unmediated relationship between particular and universal, as we just indicated? Yes, that latter is what we mean." And to the next, this is from another place in that same, I think in that same writing. "In the process, by the nature of creative reason, we're not trying merely to represent or mirror what is happening in the universe. We are acting upon the universe to such effect that creative reason itself is the cause of those changes which are affected, at least those which are significant changes." So in a sense, he's talking about that the language of the universe is creativity. We have to be fortunate enough to speak that language. And so we engage in a dialogue with the universe. So let's take a look at some of those challenges that the universal pedagogue has presented to us, and which perhaps might mean our extinction. Now, Hollywood might have you believe it's aliens coming down. Not sure about that. I haven't seen any real hard evidence. There's some grainy footage of little Tic Tacs flying around. But we do, in fact, face an existential crisis coming from outside of our home, from the cosmos. So next image, please. One of which is solar flares. So this was just this week, Tuesday. NASA warns of huge solar flares causing blackouts on Earth. The sun's most active region is turning to face Earth, bringing spectacular auroras and occasional blackouts. Next one, please. Now, the greatest of these events that we have in recorded history is in 1859, the Carrington event, which at that time, the only real electronics that you had were the telegraph, which was disrupted. You had transformers blowing up, and it created some real inconvenience at the time. But we're told if something of that scale were to happen today, it could perhaps fry the entire electricity grid of whichever nation was in the path of that incoming threat, costing upwards of $2 trillion. Now, the next one, this is something that actually, this keeps my son up at night. He prods me about it all the time, these asteroid impacts. Because you've seen in the news, what's going to happen? Are we really going to be wiped out? Now, this is a real threat. Let me look at the next slide. In our history, the most famous we know of is about 66 million years ago with the extinction of the dinosaurs, largely coincident with a massive asteroid impact. Could we again face such an existential threat? I think we might. Let's see the next one. Here was just a few days ago, asteroid alert, this was a headline. Eiffel Tower-sized 2003 MH4 to make close approach on May 24th. Will it crash into Earth? Good question. Now, if you're maybe feeling a little uneasy, we have such strong, here we have NASA giving us such strong confidence that we have nothing to worry about when they say, yes, NASA has cataloged nearly 40,000 near-Earth asteroids since 1998, with close passes by small asteroids occurring regularly. Approximately 4,700 of these are classified as potentially hazardous, though scientists believe it's unlikely any will impact Earth in the next century. I'm confident they must, is that really enough to settle your nerves at night? So let's go to the next one. And finally, you have, for example, such things as the threats of various forms of cosmic radiation. Here we've got a diagram of the motion, an artistic description of the motion of the solar system through the galaxy. Whereas it bobs up and down through the galaxy, it encounters different types and different forms of cosmic radiation when it's on the upper part of its bobbing versus the lower part. I believe the upper part is whenever there's potentially more impacting cosmic radiation. But also you'll see if you look at the records, these cycles also correspond with certain kinds of extinction events in Earth's history. So there are other kinds of threats of a galactic scale that we need to know about. We need to take on that challenge. As Mr. Happer said, this is the nature of science. These kinds of accidents are put before us as real threats. Are we going to survive as a species? Are we as individuals going to do what we need to do such that our own immortality lives on through the potential infinite existence of the species? Or will our own legacy end with the extinction of humanity as a whole? So these are big challenges, these are big issues. We currently do not have the power, the capability, we don't exist in the platform technologically to really thoroughly address both the question, to flesh it out properly, and most importantly, we do not possess yet the power to resolve these problems. Now, something, if we can get the next slide, just to sort of tease you a bit, some of the areas which are at the frontiers of science currently, which could get us up to that platform, give us that power to perhaps start to address these problems and put mankind, humanity as a whole, in the proper position to address these, comes through things like fusion. And as Dennis said earlier, right, fusion was one of those, it's always 30 years away, 30 years away. Well, some of it's hard to do, to replicate the sun on Earth, but it's also, perhaps, we've had an approach which has been too rooted in sort of the mechanistic modes of thought about how to take on these problems, sort of the kinetic approach, right? You just got to get the plasma hot enough. The hotter it is, the more energetic the particles are. You need more energy, get the collision, overcome the Coulomb barrier, you'll get the fusion, you get the power. But it's been a challenge. If we can move past our commitment to the sort of kinematic approach and look at something like the use of spin-polarized fuel. This is something Mr. Happer also mentioned, the idea of conservation laws. You have these certain laws of the universe which must be adhered to. Everything has to be coherent with these kinds of conservation laws and principles, one of which, at the subatomic level, is the conservation of spin. So we can get to the next slide, please. So here you see this is sort of just a depiction of it so the law of conservation of spin says that if you, in a fusion reaction, the sum total of the spin, which is a inherent quality to subatomic particles that reacts to a magnetic field, that if you can be spin up, down, neutral, etc. But so any, say, proton, it could be in any one of these four, a nuclei, it could be a spin up, it could be a spin down, it could be a spin zero, that whatever the sum of the products going into the reaction, the total spin has to be the same as that coming out. Now we know that the reaction products are always going to have the same total spin. So we know, like for example, with the current fusion proposals, the outcoming product spin is about 3/2. So then the two incoming elements have to also add up this. So here you've got, like, for example, you had two spin 0 elements fusing. You produce a +1, -1. Their sum is 0, 0, and 0, 0. +1, -1 is 0. You would get the fusion reaction. Now, unfortunately, whenever you're dealing with these plasmas currently, it's sort of jumbled up. You get some +1, some -1, some 0, and you're just hoping that you get enough collisions that the ones that occur are ones that will conserve spin and allow for a fusion event to occur with the transmission of energy. What that means, tapping into a higher fundamental principle at the subatomic level, changing the way we think, not as overcoming the challenge of fusion with a sort of brute force approach, but a creative approach, discovering, understanding deeper fundamental physical principles to enable these kinds of reactions. Next one, let's quickly move through here. Another type of technology being developed. These petawatt lasers, right? Achieving the dreams of such mystics as Isaac Newton and others to transmute materials. Well, it's not going to come through Kabbalistic chanting or anything like that. It's going to come through real science, understanding of the deep fundamental principles of nature. So here you have an artistic depiction of a real experiment taking place, tabletop laser experiment, where the laser's coming in, hitting the gold. You're splitting out of the gold. You're getting reaction products, which are then able to split the uranium. You're getting a nuclear fission reaction induced by a laser. But actually, more important, more intriguing, is these down here. You see this little green arrow down here? That's positron. That's antimatter. If we could actually develop and harness and get enough antimatter, matter and antimatter, put them together, pure energy equals mc². We get to that, now we're talking about real power. This is the kind of power that allows you to get to Mars not in months, but perhaps days, who knows. So these are the kinds of directions we need to be moving towards. But it only happens to the extent that we actually engage in a kind of proper dialogue with the universe, with the Creator, and with each other to challenge those axioms which have held mankind back up to this point, and to engage in a deep, thorough investigation of those higher principles of the universe, which we can then harness to transform not only mankind's relationship to the universe, but the universe itself. So that's my time, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, and our final presentation is by Jason Ross, Science Advisor for Schiller Institute. Jason?
So we heard addressed earlier in this panel the topic of this panel itself, the power of reason. What is it? Now, sometimes people use words like reason, logic, sometimes even deduction interchangeably. They're not synonyms. In fact, reason is necessarily illogical. Let me begin with two 1998 quotes from Lyndon LaRouche. He said, "Truth lies in the always radically revolutionary process by means of which valid new principles are generated, new principles which take into account the contradictions inhering in the previously proposed hypothesis. Reality lies in that higher authority which exists above any one hypothesis, which exists in the ordering of a valid succession of hypotheses. The legitimacy of science lies not in having the answer to everything at present. The legitimacy of science lies in being a path towards an increasingly less imperfect understanding of our universe, and will never be done." So the goal then of refining scientific inquiry has to be an improvement in the method by which discoveries are produced. And this is something that Lyndon LaRouche fought for over his career. He co-founded the Fusion Energy Foundation in 1974 to advance the needed scientific breakthrough that he considered to hold the most potential to fundamentally transform our physical economy and culture, namely the commercial use of nuclear fusion. In 1983, Ronald Reagan announced a policy which LaRouche had proposed, and for which he served as the back channel with the Soviet Union. This was the Strategic Defense Initiative, which called for US-Soviet cooperation in developing anti-missile technologies based on new principles, such as particle beams and lasers, providing transformative economic spin-offs along the way. This was also an economic program. His 1988 presidential campaign produced a beautiful video, The Woman on Mars, which we saw a clip of in the beginning of this panel, on the potentials for space exploration and space science to catalyze huge growth economically, scientifically, and culturally. Even while looking upward towards the heavens, looking forward towards fusion, LaRouche often criticized the practice of science itself, and he situated his views on present-day controversies in a rich history of science. When LaRouche was recruiting young people en masse during the disastrous George W. Bush presidency and the Iraq War, and especially also following 9/11, that was pivotal, LaRouche insisted that his recruits develop an educational process to ensure, most fundamentally, that they knew what it meant to really know something, to make or remake a discovery of a principle. The guiding theme for that educational process was Lyndon LaRouche's view of human creativity from the standpoint of history's greatest scientific geniuses and their discoveries. To this end, he laid out what he called a narrow path of discoveries that were crucial to understanding that valid succession of hypotheses, the process of science itself. So let's take a tour of this narrow path. We'll have 6 stops on our tour, and this is a preview of a class series that is coming later this summer that you can participate in. First is Socrates and Plato. This is Socrates. We see him at the time of his death in 399 BCE. He is about to drink the hemlock, the poison, the death sentence imposed on him by a jury in Athens. This prosecution was meant to rid the Athenian elite of one of its greatest critics. What made him a threat? We learned part of the answer to that earlier today with Mike Campbell and his discussion of Plato's cave. The individuals imagined to be stuck in the cave, seeing not real objects, but only projections on an irregular wall of objects passed in front of a flickering fire. You'd say, how could anybody possibly come to understand the real universe if that's all they're able to see? But that's the reality we live in. The cave wall. Think of that like our sensorium, both our natural off-the-shelf sensorium, our 5 senses, and our extended sensorium. Our eyes can't see infrared light, but if you get the right goggles, you effectively do have infrared vision. You have an expanded sensorium. When a scientist is measuring a magnetic field, an electric charge, so forth, we have this extended sensorium grown technologically. But no matter how good that sensorium becomes, it is always imperfect, not just by being incomplete, but by being misleading. The question to us is, how do we find and test our hypotheses of what is causing the outcomes that we perceive? Let's talk about Kepler for a moment. And this is easy, as we've heard some wonderful presentations on this in the last panel. You have probably met, or I've certainly met, people who think that the Earth stays put, people who think the Earth is flat, in fact, and doesn't move, and they think the sun moves around it every day. I heard a few laughs. That's very disrespectful. The question is, how do you know that the sun isn't moving around the Earth? Or do you know that the sun isn't moving around the Earth? Okay, so maybe think about that. How do you know that? Try testing it out. Try testing it out with somebody who thinks it's not true. See if it's compelling or not. Now, the thing is that most people basically don't know whether that's true or not. Copernicus gets the credit for saying that the sun is at the center and the Earth moves around it, but as we heard earlier, Kepler made the sun a different kind of center. It wasn't at the center, like just it happened to be sitting there and these planets are going around and it's watching them. The sun was the reason that they were moving. Totally new approach to science. In fact, that's, I think Adrian put it, he said that Kepler abandoned geometric modeling altogether in favor of physics. His main book on this, The New Astronomy, why is it called The New Astronomy? Now, the full title of that book gives the answer. He says that it's a new astronomy based on physical causes. New era of knowledge. This made him the first modern scientist, according to LaRouche, who took teams of young people in his movement to work intensively on Kepler, primary sources, Kepler himself, to share it with the world by what were then the latest technologies for animating and teaching, including interactive flash animations. This afternoon, we saw one of those ancient relics, and we also saw some new ones to help make Kepler's discovery understandable. In 2009, the 400th anniversary of the publication of that book, I had the honor of representing the LaRouche movement in Prague at the celebration there to commemorate this. On the, well, you see me with my friend Kepler there. And on the right, there's the Kepler Museum, which had a grand opening in conjunction with this conference. In that museum, they had animations demonstrating Kepler's equivalence of hypotheses and other things, the LaRouche movement animations. Now, the next topic, I'm very glad, is something that Professor Happer already started to get into, which is it addresses the question of whether the universe has intention. Is intention a scientifically useful concept? So this underappreciated French genius, Pierre de Fermat, proved the scientific value of intention. When he read the overhyped René Descartes' stupid book on light, Fermat knew something was wrong. I'll just show one picture from Descartes to give you a hint why. That's a real drawing from Descartes' book. It's got a guy playing tennis, and he explained light based on balls bouncing off of various things. It was ridiculous. Fermat made his own hypothesis that among all the different paths light might take between any 2 points, the only path it takes is the one that gets it to its destination in the least time. So here you see an example, air above, water below, and in yellow you see a variety of different paths that light might take. You can see the little orange arrows at the end. That's like if they were all on a race and you took a photo finish at the end, you can see that the dark brown path won. It got there the quickest. And that is what light does. And as I'd mentioned earlier, Fermat might not have been the first person to think of this, but he was one of the only people alive who could actually see whether it was right, who could turn that idea into an angle and test it. So, is Fermat right? Can light have a goal? Does the universe operate by intention? Today, the answer is definitely yes. Professor Happer said that the universal principle of least action, or of minimal action, is the most fundamental law in physics. And this came from Fermat. I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to work on a Fermat project that LaRouche commissioned, which resulted 15 years later in the first English publication of his work on light and his general method of maxima and minima. Thank you. Here I am with it at Fermat's birthplace in France. There were some copies outside. They're sold out. You can get them on Amazon. Okay, step 4 on our narrow path. Gottfried Leibniz. Gottfried Leibniz was Lyndon LaRouche's favorite philosopher, going back to when he was a teenager. You know, he was at home, he was reading the books on the shelf, and he really liked Leibniz. Now, Leibniz is an amazing man. He was able, by beginning from the premise of God's perfect wisdom, to demonstrate that absolute space and time were an impossibility. He had a dispute about this with Newton, or one of Newton's top surrogates, where the Newtonians said, God is all-powerful. He could have put the universe over here. He could have put it over here. Why did he put it here? Because he's God. Leibniz said, God is not just infinitely powerful, he's infinitely wise and good. Why would he do something without a good reason? Leibniz concluded the idea that the space existed independent prior to the things in it, that was the problem. This is 200 years, more than 200 years before Einstein's relativity, and Leibniz had it. In fact, to hit Descartes again, Descartes wrote also he wrote a lot of bad things. His laws of physics are terrible. He wrote a book, a paper about how balls colliding into each other, how they'd bounce off and so forth. Every single thing that he wrote in that book was wrong, with one exception. 2 equal balls at the same speed will bounce off of each other at the same speed. Everything else, wrong. And Leibniz said that there was a more general principle that would help to determine whether a physical law could be valid. And that was, if you look at it from a changing point of view, if you transform the coordinate system, is it still valid? This is exactly what Einstein did. So, you know, Leibniz is an amazing man. Now, in this session of the class series, what we're going to be focusing on is how Leibniz developed one of mankind's most important tools for understanding the world, the infinitesimal calculus. Leibniz worked out a way to understand the world as an unfolding of dynamic causes. This is the tool that Kepler called for when he had a changing principle and no way to say exactly where the planet would be. It's called Kepler's problem. Leibniz allowed us to understand the measurable result of a process in terms of an unfolding from its cause, where the cause is primary. His discovery had an impact on science like the development of steam power for manufacturing, completely opened up an expanded terrain of possibility. 5th step, Carl Gauss. You may have heard of certain numbers in math class that got a funny name. Let me pose this question here. So this says x squared is 9. X times x, something we don't know what it is, and if we multiply it by itself, we get 9. What's the answer? Shout it out. 3. Any other answers? -3. Any other answers? Okay, so we had 2 answers there. How about this one? What's the answer? What times itself is -1? Okay, somebody said I, so I'm just going to have to ask a follow-up question. What is that? The square root of yeah, that's what this says. What's the thing that if you square it, you get -1? Imaginary numbers. You say, okay, you slander. You call it an imaginary number. Well, mathematicians admitted defeat by using this symbol. They said, we don't know what this is, but it's something that if you multiplied it by itself, it would be -1, even though that doesn't really exist. This symbol means we don't know what this is, okay? So Gauss, he said that this was slander. These numbers deserved full civil rights, he said, as the expanded domain of complex numbers. These complex numbers are akin to the reality casting the shadows on the wall of the cave, the reality casting the shadows on our sensorium, the real world. As a young man, Gauss used his understanding of the complex domain, rather than its mathematical symbolism, to prove in 1799 the fundamental theorem of algebra. The importance of this is that he showed in the process that most of the leading mathematicians were wrong in their approach. He was 22, and he was taking on the greatest mathematicians of his day, and he was right. He showed that you can know something not only by describing its appearance, but by knowing what it does, like a transitive verb. Most fundamentally, Gauss addressed in a concise, beautiful, and polemical way, it's really a drama, the subsuming pivotal question of what is the nature of human knowledge? LaRouche explained the importance of this paper. He said that on this account, epistemology, it was the relevant specific virtue of that 1799 Gauss piece which had prompted me to situate it as the cornerstone of the initial educational program of the youth movement. And step 6, AI. So on what technologies and techniques is the advancement of what is called AI, or if you'll allow me, machine learning, a little more neutral, what is the advancement in this field based on? Is there unlimited progress possible in this field? Will ChatGPT version 9 exceed the creativity of America, of the world's greatest, of history's greatest geniuses? Even before that, we're fast approaching an era where students write essays with Grok, which overwhelmed teachers grade with ChatGPT. So we have computers talking to each other. Now, the issue with these things, with these large language models, which I'm sure you know if you've used them much, is that they make errors all the time. They make up books that were never written, they cite data they invented, they send you to web pages that don't exist, they make illogical claims with great self-assuredness. So it thinks it's right. Allow me to anthropomorphize a bit. The question is it? Now, how are you going to answer that? The only way you know if it's right is if you know whether what it said is right. You need to know. You can't outsource knowledge. And you don't need AI for this. You can't outsource knowledge to experts, to received opinion, to common sense. It's up to you. You got to take responsibility for what you think. So the billions upon billions of parameters used by today's large language models to make new strings of text that look like answers to something that looks like your question, the parallel, and it was brought up in the Q&A last session, that this is the same kind of thing that Kepler's doing. Billions and billions and billions of parameters in the latest version of ChatGPT. What do those parameters mean? They mean there's no answer for that. It doesn't mean anything that we can truly say, except somehow it seems to work. Compare that or contrast that with the human experience of discovery and communication of a discovery. Is this an addition of more and more parameters? Is it the uncovering of a new simplicity? So the Schiller Institute offers many ways to engage. Oh, I think I have a picture here. Yeah. As we add more and more sides, do we reach a circle? In a certain way, according to Leibniz, yes. It's a very special kind of circle. In another respect, you'd say no. This polygon is getting more and more and more complex, but a circle is a very simple idea, isn't it? A very simple idea. So the Schiller Institute offers many ways to engage. Okay, that'll play again. We have economic, we got social, we got political initiatives, we have community choruses. In fact, in panel 2, we all had the opportunity to sing. And this summer, we are going to have an opportunity to engage in science from the inside. This is the registration link for that. As we look to fusion, as we look to the moon, to Mars, to the stars, let's take the time to be effective in collectively refreshing the human understanding of how we got here today. By what path of discoveries? What fresh thinking about galaxy rotation, quantum phenomena, spin-polarized fusion, immunology could come from people raised in a culture of choral singing and with an intimate consciousness of that scientific patrimony that belongs to all members
of our beautiful human species. I hope to see many of you at the class series later this summer. Thank you.
Okay, what we're going to do here is we have limits on our time, and we have a couple of things that people hear, also some announcements. So we're going to have a very limited Q&A, but you'll just be have to catch people outside. Now, Cody has to get going, so if you have something you want to say, please do. And then I'm going to go to Jacques if he has a comment, and then Dr. Kemm.
Hello. Okay, yeah, just two quick points that struck me as the presentations were going on. One on AI. I was thinking about Einstein and what he says about what put him on his path towards discovery, discovery upon which artificial intelligence's existence really depends today, is that one, it was his father showed him a compass and the way a magnet could change somehow, magically, as a young child, could move this compass. How's that happening? Nothing's touching. What's moving this compass? The other one was his daydreams about what would it be like to ride on the front of the wave of light. What would the world look like? How would it see? What would happen? Ask yourself, could an AI ever posit those kinds of questions, to that kind of imagining, that kind of daydreaming about, what is this? What if you did this? I currently think that's probably not the case. So creativity resides somewhere else other than in the exchanges and combinations of information, per se. The other point is, Jason brought up, and we actually saw a demonstration in this timeline. We have this idea of hypothesis, higher hypothesis, and then the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, something Mr. LaRouche had put forward. Hypothesis, you have an idea about something about how the world exists. Seems to work, you push the boundaries on it, it reaches a breakdown point. It can't accommodate, like we saw with the Gauss. There's something happening that our current understanding can't accommodate our understanding of this reality that's presenting to us. So we come with a higher hypothesis, introduce a new idea which accounts for everything else we understood prior, but now allows us to understand this new ambiguity, this new phenomenon. And that's how science progresses, through hypothesis, a higher hypothesis, you push the boundaries, it breaks down, you generate a new idea, it works, keep pushing, pushing, pushing. You actually see it in nature, too. I mean, nature evolves, right? We develop things like warm-bloodedness. That was a higher hypothesis. But it's only in the human species that you have the ability to hypothesize upon the higher hypothesis, to not just exist and react to the world around you, but to actually reflect historically and say, well, what is not just the idea, then the better idea, what is the method? What is the idea of ideas? What is that which allows you to continuously generate new, higher hypotheses? And that's something you don't find anywhere else except in the human mind, the human creative potential. So I think the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis really is a universal principle, which is a higher order of evolution in the universe itself. So those are just 2 points I'm going to get out, and thank you.
I'm going to, thank you, Cody. I'm going to ask first that Dr. Kemm, you answer a question which one of the security people posed. They're not here. And I want you to keep your answer within 5 minutes. The question is this: I have a question for Dr. Kemm. I can't come up since I'm on a security deployment. The excitement around mass infrastructure development among the BRICS nations, and especially amongst African nations, is very palpable. What is your sense of the reception to nuclear power and the perspective about nuclear power in different African nations? What are some of the obstacles that you face, and how can this be supported? How can your efforts be supported?
That's for me?
No, that's for him first.
As I said earlier, nuclear is the future. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So you've got to say, how do we do it? How do we do it sensibly? This is undoubtedly the age of technology that we're in. But you've never found in history that a technology's come about that's only good. There's always bad as well. When email came about, email, excellent, but people use it for criminal activities. The same is going to happen with AR. There'll be good AR, but there'll be something that people figure out how to do damage with it. So you need to try and look ahead and see if we can predict it before the damage starts to kill people and so on, which has happened with things like Facebook and other electronics. And electricity is the lifeblood of a nation. It's like the blood flowing around your body. If it stops, everything stops. So for African countries, they absolutely need it. And as I indicated earlier, they're big in comparison to very many of the European countries, so you can't just use the same psychology to say, do it our way. So for example, you're going to need small modular reactors in African countries that you can take to the mining community or to towns and not find that you've got to go to where the electricity energy is, such as coal fields, which most of them don't have, or hydro, of which there are very few. You don't want to find you've got to go to a hydro dam and then it's 500 miles from there to where you need the electricity. So you can now take the small modular reactor to the electricity and have only a localized grid. So there's no need to have a national grid as a prerequisite for having electricity into some mining community. You can have your own electricity on a nuclear power station. It's perfectly feasible. So all of this is going to come about. There'll also be the regulations. The International Atomic Energy Agency and others have rules and regulations that you have to join the club. It's like joining the golf club. They can't have international laws that says do as we say, because a country can do what it likes. So what you have to do is say, here are some rules. If you want to join the club, abide by the club rules. That's how it works. So we've got to encourage people to volunteer, to be cooperative, and to work together. And I'm convinced that the small modular reactors is the answer. Also that you don't need the big water source, and that it's going to snowball. And so we need encouragement for everybody and say, how do we solve these problems? Because it's not just an extension of what we've got now. There's some new ones, different reactors, separate, this, that, and the other, the rules, the regulations, the technology. What do you do with the radioactive waste? How do you do fuel supplies? What are the rules about how much you can keep? There's a lot of things. But I think it's exciting, I think it's the answer, and I think it's going to happen. We're finding right now numbers of African countries have approached us, and we're in quite significant discussions with a few of them, and it's the answer. Thanks.
So Jacques, I want to now give you the opportunity to basically say or respond to everything you've heard and also sort of give us a conclusion.
Yes, the question was raised and only answered, half answered, about a curriculum for the coming generation. I think the first principle of a curriculum is never repeat after me. Never. So it leads, if you do so, to the learned ignorance. And to be a learned ignorance is worse than to be an idiot. And this is what they are doing to people in the colleges and universities today. So this issue of the curriculum should be a matter of discussion. And it is, in fact, the realm of politics, because behind the curriculum is a way to act socially and discover together what was the beginning of the first LaRouche movement. People were coming with questions, people were coming with projects, people were coming with ideas, and Lynn would constantly replicate, and there was a process of exchange. This is what we have to establish in the future. Jason was talking about everything that the Schiller Institute can provide. It's true, but there is a spirit behind that we should develop to go in a more advanced way. Pasteur already, the French Pasteur, had said that there are a way of teaching where you learn formulas. And if you learn formulas, you can apply them it goes fast, but it leads nowhere except in the mechanic diminutions or logic diminutions of a field. What he said, you should put the feet into the feet of the one that discover, and that should be the basis of a curriculum. And I think from that standpoint, what was accomplished in the conference, if people have in the minds to intervene in the present society, is to do like LaRouche. LaRouche never raised a problem because of some special interest in this or that. He raised a problem because there was a challenge for humanity and he had to intervene. So this is what they would say. Follow not only the wise words of Lyndon LaRouche, but act as Lyndon LaRouche acted and do better in all the things that you do, because you can do it, because all humans are like that in the human part. And to stop the genocide in Gaza should be conceived like a mental necessity to be human. This is what I have to say.
We have a couple of announcements and then some final words. The hotel checkout time is at 12 noon. Those of you involved in the internal business meeting, please leave your luggage in the registration room. Everyone else, needing to store their luggage should please arrange that with the hotel front desk. And then please remember to pick up any items that were sequestered by security tonight. Okay, so that's that. And I just want to say a few things as we bring the conference to a conclusion. Much has been said over the last 2 days. And in this panel in particular, we took up the matter of the power of reason to change the universe. This was the commitment, as everyone has made very clear, of the great economist, statesman, and thinker Lyndon LaRouche, and is also the continuing commitment of the Schiller Institute. And we're just going to conclude with reflecting again on the woman on Mars. We've said something about it, but it's also relevant now to come back to it, because the opening, which is all we played, has two different musical ideas. One is the music of the spheres, and the other is the music of the soul, in this case represented by Mozart's Dissonance Quartet. That quartet was the product of 3 years of investigation by Mozart, discovery or rediscovery and investigation by Mozart of the work of Johann Sebastian Bach, but in dialogue, in particular, with the musician and composer Joseph Haydn, who, other than hearing it in his head, it was one of the quartets dedicated to Haydn. The quartet was played. Mozart and Haydn played the two violins and played that quartet together. So that's the other musical example that's in that little piece. And we've already heard here about the incommensurable, the idea of a boundary condition that separates two qualitatively different, distinct, but related states. This is also what we are talking about on the question of higher hypothesis. And in the issue of the solar system of Kepler's design, and this idea of the asteroid belt, something that was discussed later and described later, including the orbit of the planet of the body series by Gauss, this idea of the difference between the inner and the outer planets is the same idea that Mozart is dealing with in the Dissonance Quartet, the dissonance of the asteroid belt between one state and another state. I'm only referencing these things because the fundamental thing that LaRouche always talked about, and people have heard me refer to his heuristic applications of the higher theory of manifolds paper, something that he put inside of the newspaper called New Solidarity in 1976, and directly states in that article, well, this is put there so that people who are workers can read this, and though they will not understand it, They will be part of the dialogue that we are having in this organization to figure out a way to change the world in a circumstance where people don't believe they can. And so his ideas were always that you take the highest conception, you must always start from the highest standpoint, and you present it to people who do not think or have been told that they are worthy of it. And in doing this incommensurate action, you free them to realize that they are not only no different than you, they are at root identical to that great idea that's being presented to them. The power of reason to change the universe, yes, is in that sense, if not absolute, it is identical with the notion of the divine spark that separates mankind from the beast. And so what we're going to do is just play again, and that will be our conclusion, The Woman on Mars.
you've been waiting for. As of 5 minutes ago, our environmental systems have been fully stabilized. Man's first permanent colony on Mars is now fully operational.